China is spoken of in terms of an economic miracle, of harmonious development, of a community with a shared future for mankind. Beautiful words behind which, what? Emptiness? Or something we are not yet able to comprehend? But what if I told you that everything we see is just the tip of the iceberg, that the dragon hides its most formidable treasures deep in the shadows? Before we continue, we ask you to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We thank you for your support. It is very important to us. In August 2021, something happened over the South China Sea that caused gray-haired generals in the Pentagon to lose sleep. An object launched from China circled the globe and struck a target. It did not follow the predictable arc of a ballistic missile. It maneuvered. It was invulnerable to all existing anti-missile defense systems. The chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff called this moment close to a Sputnik moment. But it wasn't a satellite. It was something else. Something that by all calculations, China should not have had, at least not so soon. This is not a story about what we know about the new Chinese army. This is a story about what we don't know. This is a dive into a labyrinth of secrets where every official statement has a double meaning, and every piece of steel launched poses a question to which the West does not yet have an answer. We are heading into the very heart of the mystery. What is China really building in its deserts and at its shipyards hidden from prying eyes? What is the true purpose of this unprecedented military buildup? And the main question, on which the fragile balance of our world depends: what is this phantom weapon capable of changing the rules of war forever? And how much of it does China actually have? The answers we find may shock you and frighten you, because the game has already begun, and we may not even suspect that we are already losing. Since the Cold War, the rules of the game were cruel but clear. Nuclear deterrence, mutually assured destruction. If one side launches missiles, the other detects them in an early stage. Early warning satellites see the heat signature of the launch. Ground-based radars track the trajectory. You have about 20 to 30 minutes to make the most terrible decision in human history. The flight path of an ICBM is as predictable as the movement of a thrown stone. It can be calculated, and therefore, theoretically, can be intercepted. The world has rested on this fragile mathematics for decades. Now, imagine a weapon that breaks this mathematics, a weapon that doesn't arc high into space. It flies in the upper layers of the atmosphere at a speed 5, 10, or maybe even 20 times the speed of sound. It maneuvers, evading radars and interception systems. Its flight is unpredictable. By the time you spot it, it will be too late. This is not science fiction, this is hypersonic weapon. And China, a country that just 30 years ago had a predominantly obsolete army, today appears to be the world leader in this revolutionary and frightening technology. What the world saw in 2021 was a test of a fractional orbital bombardment system, or FOBS. This is a concept from the Soviet era, but on a new technological level. A rocket launches a hypersonic glide vehicle into a low Earth orbit. This vehicle can remain in orbit, circling the Earth, and then deorbit at any moment, gliding through the atmosphere to its target with enormous speed and maneuverability. It can approach the target from any direction. For example, it could attack the US not over the North Pole, as expected from Russian or Chinese ICBMs, but over the South Pole. The US missile defense systems, concentrated in the north, would be useless. That test, which the Pentagon called a technological shock, was merely a public demonstration, the tip of an iceberg that had been forming for years in the strictest secrecy. The main actor in this drama is the DFZF hypersonic glide vehicle designated WU-14 by NATO. According to U.S. intelligence, China has conducted at least a dozen successful tests of this glider since 2014. For comparison, similar American programs have faced failures and delays. The DFZF is launched by a medium-range ballistic missile, such as the DF-17. After reaching the required altitude and speed, the glider separates and begins its deadly dance in the atmosphere. What does this mean in practice? Imagine an American aircraft carrier in the South China Sea. It is a symbol of power, a floating city protected by destroyers with the Aegis system, the best air defense system in the world. But Aegis was created to combat predictable threats. It is not capable of tracking and hitting an object hurtling towards it at Mach 10, constantly changing course. The DF-17 with the DF-ZF vehicle is a carrier killer against which there is currently no defense. But how many of these weapons does China have? This is the main question and the main secret. Official Beijing maintains an icy silence or offers vague statements about the peaceful nature of its research. At a parade in 2019, they showed the DF-17 missile to the world for the first time. 16 launch vehicles were displayed. This is what we were allowed to see. But how many are there really? Dozens? Hundreds? The U.S. intelligence community believes that China has already deployed the first brigades armed with the DF-17. Their goal is to neutralize American bases in Japan, Guam, and of course the fleet. But there is another even more alarming development: a hypersonic cruise missile. Unlike a glider, which glides from a high altitude, this missile uses a scramjet, or supersonic combustion ramjet, engine to maintain hypersonic speed throughout its flight in the atmosphere. This is an even more complex technology. In 2022, Chinese scientists published and then quickly deleted a study on the flight of a hypersonic vehicle over a distance of several thousand kilometers. This suggests that they may have already solved the key problems with the engine and cooling system. Such a weapon, launched from an H-6 bomber or a ship, could strike the continental United States while remaining virtually invisible to radar until the final minutes. China is not just building new weapons, it is building an entire ecosystem for their use. A network of satellites, over-the-horizon radars, and reconnaissance and targeting systems. All of this is integrated into a single network controlled by artificial intelligence. The goal is to create what military analysts call A2AD, or Anti-Access Area Denial, an invisible dome over the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait, which would be suicidal for the U.S. Navy to enter. And the key to this dome is hypersonic weapons. But why? Why does China, a country whose official doctrine for decades has been defensive, need such an offensive, destabilizing first strike weapon? To understand this, we need to look into another even more closely guarded secret.
On October 16, 1964, China detonated its first atomic bomb. From that moment, it became a member of the exclusive nuclear club. But unlike the US and the Soviet Union, which were drawn into a mad arms race, accumulating tens of thousands of warheads, China took a different position. Beijing proclaimed a policy of minimum deterrence and a commitment to no first use of nuclear weapons. The essence was simple. We don't need enough bombs to destroy the world. We need just enough so that any aggressor knows that a retaliatory strike will come and it will be unacceptable. For many years, Western estimates agreed that China had a modest arsenal of 200 to 300 warheads. This is enough for deterrence, but not enough for a disarming first strike. This doctrine seemed reassuring. But is it still true today? Everything changed in 2021. Analysts studying satellite images began to notice anomalous construction in the desert regions of China. First near the city of Yumen in Gansu province, then near Hami in Xinjiang, and later in the Ordos region. These were not just isolated objects, they were huge fields where hundreds of identical structures were being erected with military precision. These were silo launchers for intercontinental ballistic missiles. Over 300 new silos. That is more than the total number of deployed land-based ICBMs in the United States itself. This completely changes our understanding of China's nuclear strategy. Over 300 new silos. This figure blew the minds of military experts. What does it mean? If China fills each silo with a missile carrying multiple warheads, its nuclear arsenal could grow from a few hundred to 1,000 or even 1,500 warheads in the coming years. This is no longer minimum deterrence. This is a level comparable to the arsenals of Russia and the United States at the peak of a new era. But why? Why would Beijing make such a radical change in strategy, undermining decades of its own policy? There are different versions, each more alarming than the last. Version 1. The nuclear sponge. According to this theory, China is building many more silos than it has missiles. This is a classic Cold War tactic known as the shell game. An aggressor wanting to launch a disarming first strike on China's nuclear forces would have to target every silo, but many of them would be empty. This would force the enemy to expend a huge number of its warheads on false targets, while China's real missiles in other silos, on mobile launchers and on submarines, would survive the strike and be ready for a devastating retaliatory launch. Version 2. A shift to launch on warning. Until now, Chinese doctrine has assumed a retaliatory strike after being struck. But with the increasing quantity and quality of its missiles, it may be shifting to a more aggressive strategy, launch on warning. As soon as Chinese satellites and radars detect the launch of enemy missiles, China would immediately launch a retaliatory strike without waiting for them to reach their targets. The new silos, where missiles are kept in a constant state of readiness, are ideal for such a strategy. Version 3. Parity and first strike. This is the frightening version. China is striving to achieve nuclear parity with the United States to completely free its hands in a conventional war. Imagine a conflict scenario over Taiwan. The US decides to intervene. China, possessing a nuclear arsenal comparable to the American one and superior hypersonic weapons, could issue an ultimatum to Washington: do not interfere, or we are prepared to escalate to the nuclear level. The combination of hypersonic weapons with a large number of traditional ICBMs could give China the potential for a disarming first strike. The real number of warheads is a secret kept under 7 seals. The Pentagon, in its latest reports, predicts that by 2030, China will have about 1,000 nuclear warheads, and by 2035, 1,500. But these are only estimates. China does not participate in any arms limitation treaties and provides no transparency. It is building, in silence, far from prying eyes. Admiral Alfred Thayer Mahan, the great theorist of sea power, said, "Whoever rules the sea rules the world." It seems they read him very carefully in Beijing. The speed at which China is building its navy is unparalleled in modern history. In the last 10 years, it has launched more ships than the entire British, German, Indian, and Spanish navies combined. In terms of the number of vessels, the People's Liberation Army Navy, PLAN, is already the largest in the world with over 370 ships and submarines. The focus is on Chinese aircraft carriers. The Fujian, China's third and most modern aircraft carrier, is a real technological leap. It is equipped with electromagnetic catapults, the same as on the newest American Gerald R. Ford-class aircraft carrier. This allows for the launch of heavier aircraft, fighters, early warning aircraft, and electronic warfare aircraft. This is no longer just a symbol of prestige, it is a full-fledged instrument of power projection. But here, too, there are mysteries. How reliable are these catapults? What specific aircraft will be based on it? There is talk of a new carrier-based stealth fighter, the J-35. But how many are ready? And while the world looks at the giant aircraft carriers, the real revolution may be happening in the shadows. The Type 05 destroyer. In the West, it is classified as a cruiser because of its size and firepower. It is arguably the most powerful surface combatant in the world. It has 112 universal vertical launch system cells, capable of carrying everything from anti-aircraft missiles to anti-ship missiles and, most importantly, according to some reports, hypersonic missiles. Imagine a squadron of several such destroyers operating together with an aircraft carrier. It is a mobile fortress. But the Navy is not just about surface ships. It is also about what lurks in the depths. China's submarine fleet is its most secretive part. We know they are building new Type 09 SBN, nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines. But how quiet are they? An even bigger mystery is the multi-purpose attack submarines. According to rumors, the new Type 09 submarine will be as stealthy as the American counterparts. If this is true, then the dominance of the American submarine fleet in the Pacific will be under threat. China is building a blue water navy. The official version is the protection of maritime trade routes. The unofficial is establishing control over the South China Sea, resolving the Taiwan issue, and ultimately pushing the U.S. out of the Western Pacific. And to achieve these goals, the Dragon is looking not only to the sea, but also to the sky and even higher.
The Chinese space program is astonishing. Its own space station, lunar rovers, missions to Mars. This is the facade, peaceful, scientific. But Chinese space has another, darker side. Today, space is the nervous system of any modern army. Destroy the enemy's satellites and its army will become blind, deaf, and disoriented. And China is actively developing weapons for warfare in space. In 2007, it shocked the world by testing a direct ascent anti-satellite missile. The signal was clear: we can reach your satellites. Since then, Chinese technology has advanced much further. Analysis shows that China is launching so-called inspector satellites or servicing satellites. Officially, their task is to repair other spacecraft, but their capabilities raise serious concerns. For example, the Shijian-21 satellite demonstrated the ability to approach another satellite and drag it to a different orbit. Imagine that in the midst of a crisis, such an inspector approaches a military spy satellite. It could simply lead it away, or blind its sensors with a laser, or simply ram it. And all this would look like an accident. In addition to killer satellites, China is also developing ground-based systems, powerful lasers capable of blinding satellites, electronic warfare systems that can jam GPS signals over entire regions. The military aspects of the space program are the missing piece of the puzzle. They tie everything else together. Control of space is control of 21st century warfare. So we see individual pieces of a mosaic: revolutionary hypersonic weapons, a rapidly growing nuclear arsenal, a world-class blue water navy, anti-space technologies. But what does it all mean when put together? What is the ultimate goal? Modern Chinese doctrine is a fusion of ancient stratagems and rigid Marxism-Leninism, multiplied by ultra-nationalism and advanced technologies. Officially, China's military doctrine is defensive in nature, but in recent years, the term active defense has been heard more and more often. In practice, it means the right to carry out preemptive strikes if China believes its vital interests are under imminent threat. The first and foremost is Taiwan. Beijing is prepared to use force for reunification. The entire military buildup is aimed at making American intervention in a conflict impossible. Second is the South China Sea. China is de facto establishing its control over the most important sea lanes. Third are global ambitions. Its goal is to change the existing world order dominated by the United States and create a new Sinocentric world. But there is another point of view. Perhaps we are dealing with the largest and most successful disinformation operation in history. Perhaps China is deliberately demonstrating the construction of hundreds of missile silos to force the U.S. to spend billions on a new arms race. Perhaps its hypersonic weapons are not so reliable. But can we afford to proceed from such an optimistic assumption? The world has entered a new, dangerous era. An era where the old rules of deterrence no longer work, where new technologies create the temptation for a quick, victorious strike, where the absence of dialogue and transparency breeds fear and suspicion. China is building a 21st century army, navy, and arsenal. It is doing so in silence, behind an impenetrable wall of secrecy. We see only shadows on the cave wall, but we cannot make out the objects that cast them. We know that the dragon has awakened. We see its growing power, but we still don't know what is on its mind. Is it planning only to defend its borders, or is it preparing to change the world with fire and sword? This is the mystery, on the answer to which, without exaggeration, the future of all of us depends. And the time to find that answer is rapidly running out. Thank you for staying with us throughout the entire video. If you consider our work important, we ask you to support it with a like and a subscription. Also, so you don't miss the next news releases and to stay at the center of events, you can click the bell for notifications. All the best and goodbye.